Today we're going to be learning the proper way to trim one of your pieces, and this can go for any piece that you're going to be throwing off the wheel. Trimming is essential for when you are finished throwing. One, it helps you to give you a nice even foot so it sits flat on a surface, and two, it also helps to lighten your pieces up. When you're throwing, you don't always have even wall thickness. That means that your piece might be really heavy on the bottom, and you want to make sure that that's a lot lighter because it's not great to have really heavy pieces. You want them to be nice and light, and the way that we do that is by evening our wall thickness as we go. So in order to get started, you're going to want some water. I always like to have a rubber rib on hand. You're going to need some clay, a wood tool, and then also a needle tool. To get started, the first thing we need to do is to get to know your piece, meaning you need to feel and kind of guesstimate the thickness of your walls from the side and also on the bottom. So you can do that by feeling with your hands, but you can also do that by measuring with a needle tool. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my needle tool to measure where I'm going to be placing the feet on my bowl here. So the feet are, there's an outside edge of your foot and an inside edge of your foot. We'll be taking away the interior of your bowl so that the inside foot stands out, and we'll be taking away some of the exterior of your bowl so the outside of the foot stands out, making your bowl lighter. So I'm going to start with my needle tool, and I'm going to be looking at the inside of my bowl. So my bowl curves coming inward and then starts to flatten out around here. This is considered the floor of my piece, where it starts to flatten and stay straight. So what I'm going to do is right where my floor begins, right on the edge where it curves up and then starts to flatten down, I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to poke a hole straight through. Okay. Once I poke that hole, immediately fill that in so that you don't have a big hole in the bottom of your piece. When I flip this over, you're going to see where my hole is. I'm going to put a long dash right there with my needle tool. That's going to be the outside placement of my foot, meaning I'm going to be taking the clay away from this edge all the way to this line. So all this clay is going to go, making my piece lighter and also showing me where the outside of my foot is going to be. Typical feet, the width of them is about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. Depending on your piece, if you have a very large piece that's very wide, you might want it to go to 1/2 of an inch. But traditionally with this piece, 1/4 of an inch is just fine. So I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch in and place another line parallel to the first line. And this is going to be the inside of my foot. So that's where my foot is going to stand. So this will be the outside, this will be the inside. So all this clay is going to go away and all this clay is going to go away. So the next thing I'm going to do before I start to center my piece back on the wheel is I'm also going to measure my base. I'm going to take a little ball of clay, roll it up, stick it on the end of my needle tool, and I'm going to stick it straight down into the bottom of my piece. When I pull up my needle tool, I'll have a measurement from the ball of the clay to the tip of the needle will show me how thick my base is. So it's probably about 1/4 to somewhat of 1/2 an inch. So I'm going to keep this measurement as a guide, so when I'm trimming, I know I'm not going to trim too much away. Because if I trim too much away, I'm going to trim a hole in my piece, and then I'm going to have to throw the whole piece out and start over, which nobody wants to do. But for beginners, let's just be honest, it's going to happen most likely. So I'm going to keep this as a guide. This is going to just hang out over here for a little bit. So now that I know my measurements, now I can go ahead and start the centering process. This is a bit challenging when you first get started, but we're going to start this off by flipping our piece upside down on the wheel since we're taking the clay off the bottom. So when I'm flipping it upside down, I'm going to use the circles that are laid out for us on the wheel head, and I'm going to try to line it up as closely as possible to make it as even as possible to start. Okay. So now I'm going to start the centering process. I'm going to start my wheel slowly. You always want to move slowly with your wheel when you are trimming. Do not move too fast. I'm just going to start by touching my clay on the sides and looking for that wobble of my finger going back and forth, like we do when we're checking the centering of your piece when you're throwing. I do have a bit of a wobble sort of towards the bottom, so now I'm going to start to use my needle tool. Keep that ball of clay on there because you can leave it. You're going to hold your needle tool in front of your belly button. You're going to move your wheel, and you're going to slowly move your needle tool forward until it starts to scratch. Okay, so my piece started to scratch. It's not going to scratch all the way around. If it scratches all the way around, that means you're on center, which is great, or you're pushing too hard. My scratches started here and ended over here. So that means that wherever the scratches are, that's the closest part of the piece to me. And that means that this piece is further away, meaning I'm not on center. So I like to place my fingers around those scratches, kind of even it up. And I'm going to just lightly push my piece, not too far, millimeters, towards the blank space, towards where the scratches are not. So you're going to push the piece away from you. Smooth this off because you don't want to get confused if you're doing this for a while and have a bunch of scratches on your piece. I'm going to try again. Okay, so that's better. I have more scratches, but I still have a little bit of a gap. I'm going to find my gap, just about here and here. I'm going to give it another little nudge. Smooth off. Okay. And we'll try again. You also want to check all the way around your piece as well. So I'm scratching all the way around, which is a good sign, which means I'm most likely on center. But in order to double check, if you hold your needle tool steady with two hands, and you're going to go straight down and make a circle. If your circle is even and not swirling, you're most likely on center. And then just to be safe, do a second circle on the inside. If you have even distance between the two circles all the way around, then you are on center and you're ready to get started. So now that I'm on center, how do you stay on center? You have to put something on your clay called lugs. Lugs are just clay. They shouldn't be too soft. If they're too soft, your piece is going to move around, and they shouldn't be too hard because if they're too hard, they're not going to stick down. So it should be just a nice wet piece of clay, and you're going to need a minimum of 3. Hold your piece down on the top. Do not let your piece move, because if you try to push your lugs on and your piece moves, then you're thrown off center and you have to do this whole process all over again. Hold your piece down, put the lug down on the wheel head first. So see how I'm just pressing this down on the wheel head first. I'm not pressing it up against the side wall of the clay, because if I do that, I have run the risk of possibly breaking my lip. Because if I push really hard against that lip's the most fragile part of your piece, then you can crack it or break it. I'm going to use 3 lugs like a tripod. Secure these down. Okay. Now, we are solid and ready to go. So the next thing we need is our loop tools. So I'll be right back with those. Now the centering process is done. Now it's time for the trimming process. You're going to want 2 loop tools. You're going to want a small loop tool, and you're going to want a large loop tool. So I like the loop tools that kind of have a point on the end and have a flat side, but it's totally up to you on the kind of foot that you're going to be creating. We're going to start with our large loop tool because we're going to be taking a large amount of clay away first. And we're going to be taking the side clay away first so that we can start by defining our outside foot. So I like to put one hand on top of my piece to make sure it's not going to fly off anywhere. I wrap my thumb around my right hand, and in the 3 o'clock position on your wheel, you're going to hold your loop tool on a 45-degree angle, and you're going to slowly start to move your wheel. The clay is going to start to come off in ribbons. It should look like ribbons of chocolate, especially if you're using red clay. I'm going to hold my loop tool at this angle until I hit that line that I had created earlier. So I hit my line. So that's going to be where my outside foot is going to be placed. But now I have this weird little bump here. So I'm going to want to smooth that off. So I'm going to slowly just move my loop tool down the side wall of my clay, still staying in the 3 o'clock position. Then slowly move it up, continuing to shave away those sides. I can listen to the side of my piece. If I hear it and it sounds rather hollow, like it's echoing back, then that means that it's getting very thin. If it sounds dense, that means that it's still a little bit thick. So it's another trick that you can use while you're starting to trim. So I'm going to continue to just kind of move this down a little bit, just even that off, because I want this to be nice and rounded. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch to my small loop tool, and I'm going to define my outside foot. I'm going to be using the square end. I'm going to make it stand up nice and straight. Whatever shape your loop tool is in is the shape your foot's going to be. So I'm just going to stand that up, and that's going to be the outside edge of my foot. I'm going to want to even off this little wall here a little bit, so all I'm going to do is just flip it. I might switch tools for that. And angle a little bit. There we go. So that is the outside edge of my foot. Getting ready to get started here. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to flatten off the top of my piece a little bit. I'm going to hold the big flat loop tool into the center of the clay, nice and steady, and then slowly move my hand out to the 3 o'clock position. It's a straight line. Okay, that's going to make things nice and flat for me. Now I'm going to work on the inside of my foot. Using my small loop tool again, I'm going to define the inside of my foot by putting my line. And this is where we're going to go back to your needle tool. We're going to go back to your measurement. Remember how thick our clay was? We want to take about half of that away. So that's how deep I'm going to go down when I'm defining my inside foot. So I'm just going to hold my loop tool, and I'm going to just hold there till I make the depth of the indentation I would like. A little bit more. That's pretty good right there. So that's the depth of my indentation. So I can get rid of my loop tool now. Now I want to take all this clay away. This extra clay is not going to do anything for us. It's just going to make our piece more heavy. So we're going to get rid of this, and it's really going to make this nice foot stand out. So I'm going to hold my small loop tool really carefully flat in the center of my clay and let it just kind of spin around. Once it makes a full circle, I'm going to slowly, very, very slowly, move my loop tool out towards the 3 o'clock position. Get rid of some of this. That's going to take away all that extra clay for us. Okay, so now I'm just going to listen to my piece. Hear that hollow sound? That means that it's nice and thin. The side could still use a little bit of work, so I'm still going to take a little bit more away. And it's also going to help me to shape my piece into what I would like it to be. Okay, this looks pretty good. So I'm just going to take a little wet, damp sponge, not too wet, and just smooth off